Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Vanessa Judelman is my guest for today's Rethink Leadership podcast, the president of Mosaic People Development. She's had over 20 years of experience of helping clients to develop leaders who inspire great results. She's a speaker, author, facilitator, leadership consultant, and certified executive coach. And having worked in the trenches herself as a leader, she teaches her clients a very practical approach to leadership that she's used to develop her own high-performing teams in organisations like Campbells Soup, the United Nations, HelloFresh, SickKids, and the Bank of Montreal. Vanessa argues that for a new kind of world, we need a new, game-changing kind of leadership. And she's authored a book called Mastering Leadership: What It Takes to Lead in Today's Fast-Paced World. She uses her experience to explain what that means, and we discuss this further. Vanessa, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Tell me about yourself, your business, and your passions.
So lovely to be here with you today. So I live in Toronto, Canada. I love being near the water. I was thinking about what are my passions, and it's July in Toronto. I know people may not be listening to this podcast in the fall, but right now it's our summer. I love being near the water. I live in a beautiful city on one of the Great Lakes. So we do spend lots of time on the water. I have two sons who are teenagers. One's heading off to university in the fall. So that's sad for me, exciting for him. The other one is a competitive basketball player. So I spend a lot of time watching basketball. And when I'm not doing that, I run a company called Mosaic People Development, which I started in 2011. I work with leaders and teams, which is what I'm passionate about. And before that, I was in the trenches. I led teams that were high performing. To be honest, I led teams that weren't high performing. In the trenches, I had people that loved my leadership style, and I also had people that didn't like my leadership style. And it was from those people that I learned the most from, that I had to really dial up my self-awareness and learn a lot about leadership, because leadership is wonderful and can be so inspiring, but it can also be really challenging.
You're absolutely right. And you do argue that we're in a new kind of world. So we need a new kind of leadership, if you like, and a new kind of leader. Could you go into that a little bit further to explain it for those tuning in and share what the data is telling us about leaders today?
For sure. I mean, I've been developing leaders for almost 25 years, Jeremy, and I think you'll probably agree with me. It's the hardest time that I've seen for leaders in a long time. I mean, post-pandemic, so much change. People are working in hybrid workplaces, new business models. I feel like the problems that are facing leaders are kind of on a macro level and a micro level. So the macro level, I just mentioned, the change, new business models, hybrid workplace. On a macro level, I just find leaders are tired. I find that many leaders just lack self-awareness. I call them unconscious leaders. I find that there's a lot of promotion without education. So, somebody's an IT individual contributor working in an IT department, and they're so good at their job, and then they get promoted to be an IT manager, and they struggle. They're like, what? Help? Well, of course they struggle. It's a completely different job. And I feel like leaders sort of lack strategic insight as well. It's a requirement of the job, but there's so many things that leaders just aren't taught how to do.
And what you mentioned there, I like that terminology as far as unconscious leaders go, as far as the more negative attributes of that. And I completely agree with you. We've got too many super operators and problem solvers rather than strategic thinkers who are actually empowering and developing their teams to do the work and the implementation while being able to kind of think out there. But they're certainly not making progress as fast in some areas as they may need to. And in your years of experience, and particularly moving from the corporate world and into Mosaic, into your own business for the last sort of 13 years or so, You will also know, I'm sure, and I'd love you to share the sort of the game-changing traits and actions, habits, etc., that you see that leaders need to adopt now to be successful,
For
but not
sure.
just
Yeah.
successful, be supportive and engaging as a new kind of leader.
Absolutely. And I'm going to definitely share those with you. I think if leaders don't develop some of these skills I'm going to share with you, we see the impact on businesses. We see low engagement, low retention, poor performance, because leaders really do set the tone in their organizations and on their team. So it's so critical that people invest in developing their leaders. And interesting, Jeremy, I read a quote recently in the Harvard Business Review that only 5% of global organizations invest in their leaders. I was really quite surprised at that number. I thought it would have been higher. So it's so worth it to develop your leaders because, the impact of undeveloped leaders is really challenging.
Just picking up on that point, that's quite an interesting one for me because it's something that I note in my business too. It's been very much probably driven by the pandemic as well. The focus had shifted from we versus me, first of all, from a leadership perspective, but now it needs to shift back. And I also would call for the rest of the organization is we need to support our leaders a little bit more. It's all very well criticizing, but they need help as much as we do. Do you see organizations that are that enlightened out there?
100%. Those are my clients. Those are your clients.
Mm,
Ones who get it, really are doing an amazing job. So, they're investing in their leaders. I mean, the great organizations that I work with, they're starting at the top
mm, mm.
because many people at the top also have never been developed. I mean, just because you're a CEO, it doesn't, or a CFO or anyone in the C-suite, it doesn't mean that you've had any development or executive coaching yourself. So the companies that I work with and the CEOs, it typically is if you've got a great CEO and a great head of HR, and those two work together, that's the best combination because they understand that you need to invest in leaders. It's got to start at the top. And it trickles all the way down.
Yeah, and on that point then, in the development of leaders that you've seen there and what have you, what are the new habits, if you like, or new skill sets that are setting the very best leaders apart from the rest?
Great question. So I sort of break it down into three buckets. As a leader, you have to know yourself. You have to be able to manage your team, whatever it looks like, whether people are back in the office or it's virtual or hybrid. And then you have to be able to lead your business. So know yourself, that first pillar is all about self-awareness. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What's my work style? I mentioned there were people that reported to me in the past that didn't like my leadership style. And so I had to understand, what is it about my leadership style? I'm a very high energy, engaging person who really likes to connect with my team, but I gave people a lot of autonomy to do their own thing. Not everybody liked that. I had one person on my team in particular who said, just tell me what to do. Give me more detail. I'm like, figure it out. She's like, what? That's absurd. Why would I possibly want to figure it out? Tell me what to do. Right. And so I realized, oh, wait, just because I like to figure things out on my own, it doesn't mean everybody else likes to do that too. So you as a leader, you have to understand your strengths, right? You have to know yourself and really be able then to adjust your style based on the people that report to you, based on your team.
Yeah, and that with that triangulation point of self-awareness, team orientation, and then the eye to the business as well. It's very true, though, that many leaders are getting caught up in the operational realities of I need to hit some short-term numbers. So what would be your advice to them about breaking that chain, if you like?
I like to use the continuum with leaders, and I
Mm.
call it the task to relationship continuum.
Hmm.
So as a leader, you have to, what I always ask leaders is, okay, if you draw a line on a piece of paper and on one side write the word task and on one side write the word relationship and then put a dot or an X on that line, where would you put yourself now? And where would you like to be? And some people are all the way over to one end or the other. And the goal is to be in the middle.
Mm.
Right. So I always say to them, okay, where are you now? Where would you like to be? And that's a goal that we set for coaching. When I work with leaders, we always set very tangible goals. So that, for example, is a very common goal, Jeremy, that I work on with leaders. It typically is more people who are on the left-hand side of that continuum, who are super task-oriented. And I'll say, okay, let's say you're 2 out of 10 right now. Where do you want to be? And they'll say 5 out of 10. That's perfect. You don't need to be 10 out of 10. You don't need to be full on relationship oriented and forget about task. And then we'll look at, okay, what is it going to take then to move you from a 2 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10? What do you need to do differently? So for example, one of the leaders that I've worked with recently, he said, you know what? Everybody talks about empathy, and I know I need to be more empathetic, but to be honest, Vanessa, I don't know what that means. So interestingly enough, I said to him, okay, well, tell me about a time where you were empathetic in the past, classic coaching question. And his answer was surprising. He said, I can't think of one. Can't think of one, right? So we had to really unpack what is emotional intelligence, right? It's understanding my emotions, understanding how they impact me and the people around me, and that, empathy and compassion are part of emotional intelligence, and really look at, okay, think about somebody that you know that is highly empathetic. What are they saying or doing? And then he had homework around applying some of those tools. So it can be to that level sometimes.
Yeah, really getting down to the detail of what makes the difference. I understand that. And you talked about before is that when leaders aren't doing this, they're not attracting, retaining talent. Performance is not so great for themselves or others because they're not motivated, and therefore growth isn't established for the organization as almost like as a route forward, because perhaps you're fighting fires too much because of what's going on in the business. So let's put the shoe on the other foot, and all of these things that you're talking about, those leaders that get that right and do it very well. What are the benefits for them and the organization and others?
Well, it would be the exact opposite, right? It would be high levels of retention, high levels of performance. I mean, if you think about it this way, who wants to work for a bad leader? Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, Jeremy, but I've left organizations because I didn't like my leader, right? So people vote with their feet now. So who wants to work with a bad leader? People want leaders who care about them. And again, going back to that first pillar of knowing yourself, the way you show up for your team can be very different depending on your personality, your wiring, your work style. So I worked with a CEO who was very introverted. And he said to me, Vanessa, I'm just never going to be that leader who walks down the hallways and high fives people. I said, well, why would you want to be that? I mean, there are great leaders and that is their work style, but for you, it's not. So what we talked about was, okay, well, what does it mean for you to connect with people and to build trust with people? And we came up with a strategy that worked with him. And one of them was, instead of walking the hallways, which felt really inauthentic for him, it was having coffee meetings with smaller groups of people. And I think, that word authenticity is so important for leaders, because you have to, that's part of that first pillar of know yourself. You have to figure out, what does it mean for you to be an authentic leader?
That's right. That genuine nature of the human side of leadership is what employees are looking at. Would you agree with this statement also, Vanessa? I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but that employees these days have a lot more power of choice than they perhaps did even 10 years ago.
100%. 100%. Because I think people realize that we do have a lot of choice. I mean, a lot more people are starting businesses at a younger age. You can work from literally your computer. You can work anywhere in the world. So, it's a global village now. So people have a lot of choice. And so they do vote with their feet. And I think that it's so, that I was talking to some executives yesterday about the concept of culture. And that famous Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so many leaders forget that. That's part of that third pillar. Know yourself, manage your team, lead your business, is understanding culture. And the culture, the best definition of culture I've heard is how we do things around here, right? So every leader has a responsibility to consciously set the culture on their team. And the conversation I was having with executives yesterday was quite interesting, because one of the people was saying, one of the individuals was saying, in my team, I set a great culture, but other teams in the organization don't. And so that's another issue too, Jeremy, that we see is across leadership teams is how do leaders on executive teams then work together to build an organizational culture? Because it is the most senior people on the team. It is the leaders who set the culture, who set the tone in the organization. And so there really needs to be alignment there.
There does indeed. And that also comes from the very top, doesn't it? Is that there has to
Yeah.
be belief, because the danger
Yeah.
of that is that then employees look, say, I want to be in that team. I don't want to be in this team. I want to work for that leader or that manager, not this manager, because as you mentioned before, I can't remember if it was McKinsey or HBR, the statistic is something like 62% of people leave their leaders or managers, not the business, essentially, like you said. And we have to, it's almost now the challenge is how do you turn that round and say
Mhm.
that out of the available talent pool, how many will join because of you and how engaged they are, and how many will stay because of the same? What do you think?
Yeah, and leaders need to know that. Like nobody's telling leaders that
Hmm.
that it is your responsibility to set the tone on your team, right? And then giving leaders, I love that on your podcast you talk a lot about the how, right? And so it's giving leaders the how. Well, okay, so that's nice, but how do I do that? You can't just say, "Hey, you're a leader now, set the tone." But what? Nobody's taught me how to do that. It's actually, I always say to leaders, it's not your fault. Like you're not doing anything wrong. You were just promoted without any education. And so when you know better, you do better, right? So that's why I always teach my leaders those three pillars to know yourself, manage your team, and lead your business. So the manage your team pillar we haven't really touched on is so much about knowing how to coach, how to have coaching conversations, how to hold people accountable. How do you develop your people? How do you move your people from developing to fully developed? Everybody's favorite topic. How do you have crucial conversations? Like how do you give positive feedback? Jeremy, that's one of my favorite things for leaders to do. They don't even know how to give positive feedback properly, right? Then there's constructive feedback, which is they tend to ignore because it can be hard. And then there's that whole piece around um, building a high performing team. Like there's steps to building a high performing team. And so it's so important to show leaders the how around doing that.
I agree. And going back to your feedback point, in my experience, it's equally important that they understand how to receive feedback as well as provide it.
Mm.
Because some leaders don't take very well, in my experience, to that
What
unless.
are your tips on that? What do you tell? I'm curious what you tell leaders around receiving feedback. It's a great point.
I was about to ask you that question about the how to. You raised it first of all, but what a great point about that how to. It's the bit, it boils down to the ability to actively listen and listen
Mhm.
with empathy. That links in the listening skills with the empathy that you're talking about, really trying to understand where that other person is coming from and not being defensive. So leave your ego at the door and be open and demonstrate a bit of vulnerability and show that courage to say, you know what, you're right. And maybe I need a bit of help with that. And maybe even you can help me with that. And therefore, let's see how I can help you as well. And then it becomes a much more collaborative approach rather than you did this, yeah, but you did that, and what have you. That would be my take. What about you?
I love that. I would say yes. And the other piece I would add to that is mindset, is coming to the conversation with a growth mindset. I love the work. You're probably familiar with the work of Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And she's a Stanford professor. She studied successful people for 20 years and identified the thing that successful people do is they really focus on their mindset. So fixed mindset means you believe everything's set in stone. Growth mindset, nothing's set in stone. With choice and hard work, you can improve. So having that growth mindset is a critical part of leadership because you're going to do a lot of challenging things as a leader and you're going to have a lot of failure. And so growth mindset approaches failure as, okay, that was hard. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to have a massive failure today, bring it on. Of course not. But when we fail, we process this. We go, okay, that sucked. What did I learn from it? What will I do differently next time? And so for receiving feedback, I think that growth mindset is important too, to take the feedback, to your point, from like active listening perspective, a vulnerability perspective, and say, okay, that may have hurt my feelings. And what did I learn from it? What can I do differently moving forward to be a better version of myself?
That's right. That kind of being that day in, day out learner at all levels as well. And as you were speaking, of course, the obvious one then is to wrap everything that we both said together in a bubble of psychological safety for both the employees and the leader themselves, so that everybody can be a little bit open. So that I think we've solved the leadership world in that little conversation there, Vanessa. And in that spirit of actually getting to action, and particularly because of your vast experience in this area, for those tuning in that say, yeah, I really hear what Vanessa's saying here, and I want to do that better, and the growth mindset is the way forward, and what have you. What would be your four or five pieces of advice for them to just make some steps forward, accelerate progress?
So I would say, if we're going to go back to those pillars of know yourself, manage your team, lead your business, I would say let's start with advice for know yourself. Get a self-assessment done, like a DISC profile or something. Like, I like the DISC because it measures your work style, DISC. If anyone listening is not familiar with that, get an assessment done. Strength finders, you can do strength finders online. It's very reasonably priced as well. Take some time to really know yourself, understand your wiring, understand your strengths and weaknesses, and think about what you need to do to change or adjust your style to meet the needs of your people. Like my example of how I had to be a lot more specific and set goals and tangible with leaders who required that from me. So know yourself. Manage your team, I would say learn how to coach. And we've touched a little bit on coaching. I would say, if you break down the pieces of coaching and how to do it, the first piece is listening. So really practice your listening. I do a fun exercise with leaders, Jeremy, where in my training program where I teach leaders how to coach, I say to them, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to work with a partner. And partner A, you're going to share a business issue for 1 minute, just 1 minute. And partner B, you're just going to listen for 1 minute, no interrupting. So at the end of the minute, I'll say to leaders, how did that go? And they go, that was horrendous. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to interrupt. And I say, might I remind you, everybody, that was 1 minute, right? So people are just not used to listening. So as a coach, you have to listen, ask really powerful, open-ended questions, and then brainstorm solutions to problems with your team. Because if you brainstorm solutions with them, they're going to be more accountable to the solution. From lead your business pillar, I would probably say delegation. I think it's really important that leaders understand the why of delegation. Delegation is not just to get stuff off your plate. I mean, it is, but if you think about it, a lot of leaders that I meet are, there's a CEO that I'm working with right now, used to be the property manager of a real estate company. And now he's the CEO. Well, guess what he's doing? He's doing his old job. He's still property manager. And now he's CEO as well. You have to let go. A lot of leaders hold on to things from past jobs. You have to let go. So you can really get up that leadership pipeline, really focus on what your job is today. So delegation. So learning how to let go, learning how to delegate properly, building your team so you can delegate. It's great for succession purposes. It's amazing for engagement. I mean, there's so many reasons that leaders need to learn how to delegate.
And that's important because the other thing that leaders have to have in mind is that one leader isn't enough these days, is that there is so much going on. You need help. That's part of that kind of being a little bit more open, is that we don't have all the answers these days. And I go back though to your points here about the, listening, the coaching kind of red thread that goes through everything that we're talking about here. It helps those leaders move from, in one way, performance management more towards performance support, which then starts to raise the organizational bench, right?
Oh, yeah. And it's great for accountability too.
Yeah.
One of the things I teach leaders to do is how to have an accountability meeting, because, I say to them, okay, so you have to hold your team accountable. Again, they're like, how do I do that? It's like, it's not your fault that you don't know how to do that. Nobody taught you how to do that. So accountability meeting could look like, a quick meeting on a Monday morning, 15 minutes just to check in and say, what's on your plate today? What are your goals? what help do you need from me to move those goals forward? And what action steps will you take? Like it can be as simple as that.
It can be, and it goes back to the point you made before as well. That example that you gave, it can be virtual or it can be live, I suppose. But let's just have a virtual coffee for 20 minutes, nice and informal. Let's just share at the beginning of the week, and then download maybe at the end of the week, and we just kind of have a nice sort of flow going through. Well, I could talk about this all day, Vanessa, but sadly we have come to the end of our time here, and I'm sure many tuning in will want to connect with you, find out more, keep that conversation going. How do they do that?
So you can find me on my website, which is Mosaic People Development, mosaicpd.com. I also have another URL called Your Leadership Resources. So if you're interested, there's a free leadership assessment there that you can download. There's some other great free resources. If people are interested, feel free to head to Your Leadership Resources as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been it's a conversation that I'm personally passionate about as well. And I sense that we have a very similar view on this. So I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.